Okay, can you all hear me? Hello, good day, can we all hear me?
Yes, Dennis, I can hear you clearly. I'm sure we can.
All right, thank you everyone for joining in and welcome to day 2 of our series. Our series for the impacts of the EU CSDD on African supply chain. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has been able to join in. I can see our guest speaker is already on call. Mr. Daniel, we are happy to have you here with us. We also want to thank the host of this particular gathering, Mr. Joseph. Thank you so much for joining in. And I can see we have also Mrs. Ivy Aka with us. Thank you, Ma, for joining in. Just quickly to run through some of the introduction for today's meeting. Kindly give me a moment to quickly do that. Firstly, I'll be starting off by introducing Miss Ivy Aka. Ms. Ivy Aka happens to be the Assistant Director for the Public Affairs NHRC, that's the Human Rights Commission. She's the Communication Expert and Public Affairs Analyst Program Officer for the Business and Human Rights. Thank you so much, Ms. Aka, for joining us. We are happy to have you here with us. Coming, just 1 minute. All right. Secondly, our guest speaker for today, Mr. Daniel, just going to quickly run through his profile that we have here with us. Mr. Daniel Schofender, sorry if I didn't get the pronunciation of your name very correctly, serves as the RCP European Legal Advisor within the RCP. His primary focus is on drafting and disseminating clauses tailored to the German and European context. He collaborates with stakeholders from various sectors, including businesses, NGOs, academia, and consultancy to promote, sorry, I kind of got lost. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. To promote responsible contracting, Daniel coordinates the German team for the project developing European model contract clauses, playing a pivotal role in cultivating and sustaining relationship with key stakeholders such as academia, businesses, NGO consultancy, and the broader business and human rights community. Daniel is a German lawyer and lecturer in business and human rights. He is also actively involved in implementing the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act at an international logistics firm. His past experience includes contributing to the creation of the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, where he provides guidance to key stakeholders and decision makers. Additionally, he advises businesses across various sectors on the Act's implementation. Daniel is a frequent speaker at training sessions, lectures on BHR, the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, and the CSDD. He is also a regular contributor to journals and books on BHR issues, and he co-authored the first handbook on the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel, for joining in. We are happy to have you with us. So I'll just go ahead and hand over to our host for today. That is Mr. Joseph Ogo to get us started with today's session. Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Daniel. Thank you so very much, Dennis. I want to just firstly say a very big thank you to Mr. Daniel. Thank you for the support, for the encouragement, and today would definitely not have been possible without we getting your yes. So we don't take that for granted. One of the things that basically inspired me to do this is because as a lawyer, I spent about 12 years, roughly 12 years, over a decade, working with the National Human Rights Commission, after which I resigned my appointment there and started my private practice in law, working with companies as well. So we've been able to support over 2,000 companies in Nigeria. That's my firm personally. And I know for sure that issues that relate to business and human rights for those companies, even some of those companies are companies that have, foreign footprints. They do business in Nigeria, but when you begin to talk about the issues around business and human rights, it's almost like you're speaking an alien language. The policymakers from the National Human Rights Commission, they have to a very large extent put out as much information out there. But I personally feel that there's been a very huge disconnect between companies and between the government, because we all know that the UNGP has the three pillars. The government has its own obligations or responsibilities, then the corporates, then of course remedies. But where there is no fusion, there is a lack of fusion between what the government is doing, what companies can do, and in some cases, remedies are almost totally absent, as a policy direction for maybe companies to even comply with respect to having a mechanism for remedies. So that primarily led me to begin to ask some of these questions. My activities as well in some boardrooms, I provide certain secretarial services for the boardrooms of some companies, and I've come to realize that if this particular discourse does not find its way into the boardroom, then there'll be a very huge disconnect between a country can have a very beautiful national action plan, but that national action plan doesn't translate into specific actions that companies can take, because the companies are not necessarily aware that there's that disconnect. So I for one believe strongly that we can begin to talk about, there should be more conversations around business and human rights so that we can close the gap. We can close the gap of the ignorance around the subject matter. So speaking with you also, I just want to acknowledge Anais here with us. Thank you so much for yesterday. It was really mind-blowing. So I wouldn't want to say so much. I know that your time, Mr. Daniel, is very much important, and you've had several meetings already today. So for you to be here with us today, we don't take that for granted. So we'll just quickly dive right in, have your presentation. Then we have a representative of the National Human Rights Commission in Nigeria also on today's session. She would follow suit after your presentation. She might make like a 5 to 10 minutes conversation. Then we can now take the conversation forward to see how we can plug in some of the challenges and find the solutions. I believe that there is so much to learn from the system in Europe. When I put in BHR, for example, on LinkedIn, I can see that you find the majority of the practitioners are actually European-based or Western-based. So there is need for us to see what has worked across Europe and see what we can pull out from what is working and how we can improve our own systems here in Nigeria. So thank you so very much, Mr. Daniel Schofelder. I wouldn't know if I pronounced that right, but you can help us definitely with the right pronunciation. Thank you. You're very welcome to proceed with your presentation.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, it was not correct, but it doesn't matter. It's very hard to pronounce my name for other languages, so don't worry about it. Schönfelder, if you want to try, but I mean that's like B2 level German, so and that's dangerous territory. So maybe don't try. Yeah, I'm very happy to have this conversation with you, and very honored for you to invite me to this conversation, because yeah, it's very interesting for me to engage with Nigerian BHR practitioners on this and have this conversation, because I mean, of course, Nigeria, biggest economy, biggest country in Africa. It's like in some ways, talking with you guys is also looking into the future, no, of our humanity, of our planet, and we are in this together. Business human rights is about improving the situation for humans all over the world together, because it's a global common good that we have, no, having systems, working conditions in place that respect human rights and that protect the planet, and it's what we need for us all together in humanity to thrive. And we cannot just do it here from Europe and thinking about, okay, how would it play out in Africa? and so on. We need to talk. We need to learn from each other. No, so I'm very, very happy to have this talk with you. I would proceed with some introductory remarks on the CSDDD, just kind of trying to explain a bit what it is, and also bringing some thoughts on what it could mean for Africa, for African businesses, for African NGOs, for African governments, and how they could like interact with this new regulatory framework for the biggest benefit of the stakeholders involved. But of course, Anais, for example, is a big expert in Africa. No, I don't have so much African and expertise, so I have to say, please take my recommendations with a pinch of salt. And if you think no, they are not true at all, yeah, please say so. And I'm humbly here to learn from your expertise. Okay, so I would start, and this is based a bit on of course on the CSDDD and on my implementation experience with several firms, business associations, NGOs. So this is where I'm coming from as a German business human rights practitioner, having implemented the German Supply Chain Act and now also starting to implement the CSDDD. So let's maybe start. I always liked it in my law lectures when I was going to law school, when the people start with the purpose of the law, because like talking about the details of the law without talking about the purpose of the law is always a very dull exercise, and you don't really understand the details if you don't think about the purpose. So let's start with the purpose. The purpose is stated in the recitals of the CSDDD as well. The recitals are kind of the explanatory memorandum of the law itself. So in European law, you have the articles of the law and you have the recitals of the law. The recitals explain what the legislator intended with the law, and they can be used to interpret the law. But the articles are what rule, they rule the legal interpretation, so to say. The recitals can only help to interpret if there's a lack of clarity. But the recitals say something on the purpose of the law. They say that it is about exploiting the potential of the single market, that is the single market of the European Union, to contribute to the transition to a sustainable economy and contributing to sustainable development through the prevention and mitigation of actual or potential human rights and environmental adverse impacts in companies' chains of activities. What does that mean if you think more about it? Like, how does the CSDDD set about doing that? I think for thinking about that, it's good to take a step back and think about globalization, think about free trade, think about deregulation. Free trade is a very good thing. No, I'm like global free trade. It creates wealth around the globe and it helps drive development. But free trade often has a cost. Many different categories of costs. One category of costs is that free trade can create a race to the bottom. Why? Because if you are country A and country B, and you're thinking about who should produce what, who should attract the investment to construct the factories, to construct, to then produce the products, there will be a pressure. There's many things that will influence these decisions, but one thing will be thinking about, okay, where can I have less costs of production? And what can drive costs of production is also environmental and social standards, a higher minimum wage, stricter rules on the emission of greenhouse gases. So there is a certain incentive in a global free trade economy to say, okay, let's be, as a country or also as a company, as a global supplier, let's try to be as cheap as possible. And there can even be in the incentives of in the drive of the competition be the strong incentive to say, okay, we will even do that when we have to lower environmental and social standards in a way that will harm our local workers and our local environment. In this context, the CSDDD and also the UNGPs and the OECD guidelines, and also the German supply chain, all of these laws, human rights due diligence in general, intends to not abolish free trade. Of course, it's about making possible fair and free trade by kind of saying, okay, competition is good. It's also good that there are pressures to lower costs, to be efficient, but there should be a floor for this competition. And this floor should be global human rights standards. And it shouldn't matter where you produce or if you outsource the production to a supplier. These standards always need to be upheld. And this is why we need an obligation for a company to look at the human rights and environmental impact of his supply chains, no matter where they lay, to counterbalance this drive of globalization to deregulate, this race to the bottom, establishing a global level playing field that ensures that planet and people are respected. Basically building free and fair trade, and hopefully replacing the race to the bottom, where, for example, Bangladesh would say, okay, I want to be cheaper than Pakistan, for example, for textile, I need to lower my minimum wages, to saying, okay, I want to be a good production site for the investor. I need rule of law. I need fair standards for the businesses, but I also need to be a sustainable place of business where workers are respected, where the planet is respected. And this will be a factor for me to attract investment. That's the race to the top. That was also highlighted in the UNGP 10+ report by the UN Working Group. So this is basically, for me, like, if you want to say so, the economic thinking behind this. And there's also some legal thinking behind this. Human rights are our most important global value. I also don't think it's a Western value. Many people try to say human rights are a Western value. I think that's a lie, because if you look at the creation of human rights in 1948, the colonial powers did not want many of the things that are in these legal texts. So countries like India stepped up and say, no, we have to put in rules on race discrimination in the human rights catalog. Of course, even if France and UK at that point did not want to do that. And they also derive from traditions set by many religions, by many countries. I think it's not correct to say they are a Western construct. It's our global common value. And they are about protecting the basic needs and interests of what makes us human. And they protect them in a classic way against state power. But it's illogical in a globalized world where often companies have more power than states to say, okay, these are human rights, our most important values. We protect them against the state. But if businesses abuse them, we don't care. That's not logic. So this is a bit the background, economic-wise and maybe theory-wise, of the CSDDD and why the CSDDD and the purpose of driving this and how it does that. But let's look into more detail now on the details to translate these abstract ideas into practice. So first, the CSDDD only applies to very big firms. When all the phasing in occurred from 2029, I think now from 2030 because of regulatory changes, it will apply to companies that are based in the EU and have 1,000 employees and a minimum of 450 global turnover, 450 million euro global turnover. For non-EU companies, also African companies, it will apply if they have more than 450 million euros of turnover in the EU. I'm not enough of an Africa expert to be able to say how many African companies crossed that threshold. Would be interesting to know. So that's the direct coverage. But we will see about the indirect coverage in a minute. And what is the requirement? This is basically the classical wheel of human rights due diligence, as you know it from the OECD text and so on. That's really nothing new if you're into the topic of business human rights. Basically, you have to set up a risk management, a documentation system, a complaints procedure. You have to do regular risk analysis and ad hoc risk analysis when there are changes. Then have to prioritize the risks, and you have to take preventive measures. You have to have a due diligence policy. You have to take corrective and remedial action, and you have to assess the effectiveness of your measures, and you have to report about them. That should be familiar to most of you if you know the UNGPs, the OECD. It's basically the same procedure. There are some interesting principles also familiar to people who know business human rights. So generally, the obligations of human rights due diligence are formulated here as obligations of means, not as obligations of results, especially in the value chain, because the basic idea here is, okay, you can ask a business to respect human rights to 100% in their own operations, great, because it's in their hand. Although it's more complex if you go into the details, but in general. But if it's a business partner, the question of if the business will manage to get the business partner to change if there's a problem depends on many factors, among them their leverage. So we should not make it an obligation of guarantees, but rather an obligation of means to continuously improve the situation if there are problems in relation to the value chain and in relation to the business partners. All this is only required as far as appropriateness, as far as it is appropriate. Appropriate is kind of, if you want to say so, the German legislator said it more precisely than the CSDDD legislator. They said, you know, there's a German supply chain, they say appropriateness is about giving the companies a margin of discretion within which they can decide and weigh what are the best measures to take. Yeah. So why did they do it like this? Because the world is super complex, and because supply chains are super complex, and because businesses buy from tens of thousands of suppliers and hundreds of products and services, so they cannot do everything perfect in all of them, and it's not clear what to do in all of them. It's clear that you have to look at them, try to identify the biggest risk, try to think about what would work to improve them, and then take measures. So you need freedom for the businesses, but this freedom has limits. They have to base their decisions kind of similar to a business judgment rule, or kind of similar to discretion of the administration in public law. I have to base it on certain criteria, the appropriateness criteria. And one very important criterion of these appropriateness criteria is effectiveness. Very interesting. If you look into the CSDDD, you will see that it's not enough to just take measures, just make a risk analysis and say, check, I'm fine. I looked at some sources, I sent out some questionnaires to suppliers, that's my risk analysis. No, you have to do effective risk analysis. You have to do a risk analysis that actually carries within itself the chance that you will then have the information to really improve the situation on the ground. And if you take measures, you have to have effective measures, meaning that the measures need to also have the chance to really improve the situation. It's not enough to tick box. You have to have a hypothesis about the effectiveness. You have to have a theory of change about why what you will do as part of your human rights due diligence will actually improve the situation. Doesn't have to be a guarantee. Effectiveness is not a guarantee. Effectiveness is that you have to have a decent hypothesis about how it will work and why. And of course, stakeholder engagement is also a general principle. What do you have to cover? You have to cover your chains of activity under the CSDDD. It's clear that this covers the upstream. of the supply chain. Yeah, so where do my pre-products and raw materials come from, and are the human rights respected there? It becomes a bit more complex if we discuss if it covers downstream. There are some examples. So downstream, what happens with my product? Yeah, what do my business partners who I sell the product to, what do they do with it? How is the product disposed of, for example? How is it used? A very complex question is use covered? Why? Because in the legal definition, it doesn't say use in the definition of downstream. It says only related to distribution, transport, and storage of the product. So you could say that use is not covered, but there are also very good arguments, legally speaking, to say, yeah, use is covered. We can go into details if it's interesting for you afterwards. And you have to cover your own activities. So the chain of activities, that's your business partners, upstream and to a degree downstream, and your own activities. And that includes also your subsidiaries. Now there's an interesting other legal question. Does it cover also companies that you are invested in? If you only own 20% of the shares, again, you could say, well, no, because it only talks about controlled enterprises, and 20% of a share normally doesn't give you the control of the enterprise, although in some cases, special cases, it might be the case. But then the question is, okay, but can it be the correct answer, thinking about the purpose that we talked about, or that I talked about before? Can it be the correct answer that you don't have any responsibilities into what a company does that you have invested 20% in? I believe from an ethical point of view, that would be a bit illogical, because I mean, the basic idea is you have to exercise your powers as a business with responsibility. And of course, you cannot be perfect, but if it's possible for you to improve the situation, you should. And with the share of 20%, you have influence over the company that you are invested in. Maybe that's a nice idea, but the question is there also a legal argument for that? I say that yes, because the law says you have to cover your own activities, your own operations with your human rights due diligence. And cover your own operations and activities, well, one of these operations is being an investor. Yeah, if that's part of your corporate purpose, and otherwise it would be illegal for you to invest in a company, no? Then it's per definition part of your own operation, the exercise of your investor rights. And I don't really see an argument to say why the exercise of investor power should not be covered by human rights due diligence. But it's an interesting debate that hasn't been debated too much until now, so I'm also interested in your thoughts. What do you do now when you thought, okay, I'm covered by the personal scope, I know I need to go after my chains of activities, now I need to start the risk analysis. How does that work? There are some details that the law gives us. I say you should start with a general risk mapping, identifying broad categories of risks, and then going where the highest risks are, going into an in-depth assessment. So for example, what could you do, or what has been done in practice? What makes sense is to say, okay, I buy 500 products and services. Yeah, I'm looking into my system to see what's the services that I buy. I ask my subsidiaries what others are there. I classify these, in my view, according to volume and the risk profile. Where do I get the risk profile from? There's many data providers for this, and for country and sector risks. And then I try to map and I say, okay, which are the product and service categories that are most risky? And then second, I think, and where do I really have influence? And I should focus on those. Now, some of you might say, okay, you cannot use leverage and influence to prioritize under the UNGPs, under the OECD, under the CSDDD. And it's true, it's not mentioned. And maybe there could be an argument made to say, no, you cannot use leverage to prioritize. But I say that would be very unpragmatic, Because the problem is if you have a very small category, you always have limited resources as a company, no? You cannot do everything. So you have to prioritize and you have to deprioritize as well. If you have a very small and risky category and you say, okay, I will prioritize this one, although I have a very small volume of spend, it's not like you will change anything. Yeah, if your business once a year buys one product, like let's say in an amount of 10,000, 20,000 euros, and it's a very risky product. If you then come to your suppliers that you buy it from and say, oh, I want to talk with you about taking some structural measures because that's what you need to change, no? They will say, no, I don't care who you are, 10 or 20,000, that's nothing. I will just ignore you. I would rather that the company focus their limited resources on where they can really drive change. But I'm open that the legal arguments in defending that approach are a bit tougher than the legal arguments that would say, no, 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 you cannot prioritize and deprioritize according to leverage. But that's a great debate that we will have in practice in the following years. So what do you do then after identifying and prioritizing risk? You have to take action. The CSDDD has many examples. For example, it says you have to establish codes of conduct with your business partners. You have to implement responsible purchasing practices. That's interesting because responsible purchasing is a really big lever of change. It implies that you need to look at your incentives as a business. What do your prices allow your suppliers to do? If you pay them very low prices, it will be very hard for them to pay fair wages to their workers. So if you have in a high-risk sector very low prices, you might be contributing to human rights harm. So you should look at your purchasing practices. Same thing with delivery times, order changes. All these things can influence the capacity of the supplier to uphold human rights. And you as a business under the CSDDD need to think about the commercial incentives that you set and correct them to incentivize rather than disincentivize human rights performance by suppliers. If you identify concrete problems, you have to make action plans to improve the situation. You should only think about disengagement and exit termination as a last resort. There's a horrible example on this point from Germany, I have to say, which considers Africa. I don't know if you know the case, but there's a Austrian building firm, Strabag, and they said, when the German Supply Chain Act came into force, well, we don't want to do business with Africa anymore because it's too complex in terms of human rights and child labor. And they left the African market at that point with that argument. Horrible approach to this, really horrible approach to this. Responsible disengagement and exit as a last resort is the opposite of that. Because disengagement and exit can do more harm than good. Of course, it's necessary to say to your business partners, look, guys, if you really do not implement human rights standards, and then if we find problems and want to improve them with you, and you say, no, 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 we don't have anything to do with this, we will not do anything, then we have the option to terminate the business relationship because we only work with serious business partners. That's important to have in any contracts on human rights. But the exit should be the last resort, because what is the result of the exit? For example, in the cases of child labor, well, the children normally or often work because the parents are poor. So if you fire the children without thinking about a remediation program, you will not improve the situation, you will make it worse. Because then the children have another problem. In addition to not going to school, they will go hungry. This is what responsible disengagement and exit as a last resort is about. Thinking about it as an option that you can take, but only very, very carefully. Other interesting point, remediation obligations. So if there was a violation of human rights, you have to make the victims whole. You have to set up a notification mechanism and complaints procedure, I will spare you the details because basically they are the same as in UNGP 31, so it's nothing new for business human rights experts. Interesting point is the effectiveness criteria. I already talked a bit about it. You have two dimensions of the effectiveness. One is the measures must be ex ante effective in improving the human rights and environmental situation. That means, as I said, you have to have a hypothesis about how they will do that. If you don't have that, you're not meeting the effectiveness requirement. It's a kind of an anti-tick boxing requirement of the CSDDD. It prevents you from just saying, okay, yeah, I did a risk analysis in any way, didn't think about if it will really find problems, didn't think about talking to rights holders. Okay, then I will do some measures. I will just send all of my suppliers a code of conduct where they say, yeah, everything is perfect in terms of human rights. And if it isn't, I can terminate the business relationship. That would be the opposite of that. Yeah, because first, if you don't talk to rights holders, you will not uncover many human rights risks. And second, if you just send codes of conducts to your suppliers that require them to be perfect and otherwise terminate, that will not drive change because there's human rights risks and violations in any supply chain, in any business. For example, one of the risks covered is discrimination. I cannot tell you the name of any major German businesses where, for example, it would be guaranteed that Black people are not discriminated. Unfortunately, Germany is from all the places of the European Union, according to a study last year by the Agency of the European Union for Fundamental Rights, the most racist place to be. That's very sad for me to tell you. And that's a human rights problem. And that shows very clearly that it would be an illusion to say any businesses is free of human rights risks and violations, because you don't even have to go further than Germany itself to find many systemic human rights risks and violations that businesses have to work on to improve. Yeah. And I also recently I heard a report about forced labor in Germany. We have forced labor in Germany, yeah, in several sectors like construction or logistics or agriculture. I'm not saying that everyone there is in forced labor, but it happens. Yeah, so this is also not about Europe coming to lecture other continents. We have our work cut out, no, in terms of human rights problems. We also have improvements that we have to make. Okay, but yeah, that's effectiveness, and that's why it's not realistic to say and not effective to say, okay, I let my suppliers guarantee that everything is perfect in terms of human rights, because it isn't. And if they legally said, okay, it is perfect, the incentive for them is to lie and to hide, then you will not find the problems, and then you cannot improve the situation. So it's the opposite of effective to say guarantee that everything is perfect. Rather, you should say oblige yourself to human rights due diligence and continuous improvement. Like any company under this law, yes, identifying risks, prioritizing them, and then acting to improve. You have to review the effectiveness of your human rights due diligence measures at least once a year under the CSDDD. Yeah, there's also an obligation to address climate change, but let's not go into details, although it's interesting. Basically, each company has to make a plan how to get in line with the requirements of the Paris Agreement. And drive their emissions down. What happens if companies don't do all of this, or no, don't do some of these things? There is provisions that give the administration a power of supervision. They can ask companies for documentation of measures, strategies, and so on. They can also go to the premises. They can receive complaints from NGOs, from rights holders, about cases. They can investigate cases, and then they can impose fines up to 5% of net turnover in case of serious infringements. And there is I'm talking about pre-omnibus now, no, there is a provision requiring the possibility of civil liability for victims. Many things are in flux, and because there has been a lot of backlash against bureaucracy in general in the European Union, I would say partially justified, partially exaggerated. And this has also affected the CSDDD. So there's right now a regulatory discussion, not about abolishing it, but about watering down some things. This is a summary of all the things that I want to water down. We don't know where it will go. I will just mention one or two things that are really important. One thing that is really crucial, they want to water down the obligation to look for the upstream business partners to the tier 1. So saying, normally, you only have to analyze what your direct supplier is doing. So, for example, if I'm a German supermarket and I import cocoa from Ghana or from Ivory Coast, I only have to check the trader that imports that stuff that sits in Hamburg, in my city here. I don't have to check further down. Yeah, it's nonsense, because often the problems are further down the supply chain. There's an exception in the reform that is proposed, saying, okay, you have to look further down if there's plausible information about human rights risks. Maybe it's sufficient that there are lots of reports about child labor in the cocoa production to say there's plausible information. Maybe there's not. That will be a huge legal interpretation fight, no? Why did they do this? They thought, okay, let's make it less complex for companies, yeah? And from a first point of view, you would say, okay, yeah, makes sense. Of course, it's very complex to go all the way down the supply chain. Maybe it's easier to focus on the first tier. The problem is that the opposite seems to be true. And that can be exemplified with two examples. Germany and Norway both have laws like the CSDDD, German Supply Chain Act and Norwegian Transparency Act. Both require companies to do human rights due diligence. The German Act only requires firms to look at the tier 1, the first tier, the direct suppliers, and then at the indirect suppliers if there's substantiated knowledge about potential violations. What has this led to? A lot of companies, not all, but many German companies focused their efforts only on the first tier, on the direct suppliers. Problem is, often there's not a lot of risk in the direct suppliers. Problem is, they tried to analyze all their tier 1 suppliers in a very superficial way. And then people said like, ooh, this is just bureaucracy. Yeah, that was the impression that was created. And this is why we have a bit of a backlash in Germany. It's based on a wrong understanding of the law, but there's some details that we can discuss if they're interesting for you. Meanwhile, in the Norwegian experience, it didn't say anything about only focusing on the direct suppliers. It said, focus on your supply chains and prioritize your efforts to look where the risks are biggest. Yeah. And what did the Norwegian companies say in the evaluation from the Norwegian government and from KPMG Norway last year and this year? They said, well, of course it's complex. We will not lie. Human rights due diligence is complex. But with this risk-based approach, it makes sense for us because it makes it manageable, because we can focus on our efforts where it matters most. You almost never heard German companies say that. So it's a really bad idea to try to copy the failed, in that part, failed German model. Yeah, I really like the German Supply Chain Act. Apart from that, I think it's a great law, and I think the German firms are doing great stuff to improve human rights. But that's really the weakest point of the German law. And that's the part they copy-paste in the reform. That's not a good idea. Okay. Let's not focus on the more things, but close with some my thoughts about the implications that might have for Africa. So, I mean, as I said, I'm not an Africa expert. I work a bit with countries in Latin America and in Asia, not with countries in Africa until now, unfortunately, or would love to. But what do I think about it? So, if you think first about the implications and obligations, I would say the direct obligations for the CSDDD for African businesses will be limited because not many African businesses will pass this threshold of 450 million sales per year in Europe. Maybe that will change, would be great. I think Africa is a great continent with great potential. And I wish the African economy the best of luck to have more exports to European Union. But I guess, but I'm happy to be corrected that right now this direct obligation would be limited. What is very relevant are the indirect obligations. And there's many ways of this. One of them is, for example, in my example before, the cocoa supplier, no? The cocoa producers in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana. Any other commodity producers, yeah, or cobalt from Congo, any raw materials, any rare earth that we Europeans hope to get. Also, if the Chinese don't buy them all of this is indirectly covered because there will be some time in that supply chain a European business obliged to meet the CSDDD, so they will look for the risks in those supply chains, also in the deeper tiers. Another dimension of coverage will be subsidiaries and projects in Africa. For example, a global firm that opens their local subsidiary, their African headquarters in Nairobi. This headquarter will be covered by the CSDDD, this subsidiary. Projects in Africa. Let's say that a European mining firm or European infrastructure firm goes to Africa to help build a train line, to help build a road. That will be a project executed by this company that will need to meet the human rights standards under the CSDDD. This means risks and chances for Africa, I believe, for African businesses. There's the risk, of course, that if African businesses do not implement business human rights standards, they will become less attractive business partners for European business partners. So there's a chance that African businesses might be excluded from some supply chains if they don't live up to the business human rights standards. The opposite, I mean, the other side of that coin is that it is a chance, as in the example I gave with Bangladesh and Pakistan, and I hear this often from countries, from production countries, that are saying, hey, but we can be especially sustainable and then especially attractive as a business partners. We can do the right thing as a business because, I mean, it's good if you as a business say, let's think about a good way to do business that is sustainable, that is not harmful for people and planet. Yeah, and even become more attractive via that in comparison to others. What could be done to prepare for African businesses? Understanding the requirements, understanding CSDDD, understanding human rights due diligence, starting to take measures. For example, analyzing typical sector risk. I gave some potential open access sources here that can be used for that. Preparing measures, yeah. The CSR risk check and the BHR Navigator are really great open access tools that you can just find on the internet and use. Very easy to use also. Starting projects jointly to implement, for example, if the cocoa producers come together and say, let's analyze all together what are the typical risks in cocoa, what can we do to improve it, what do we need from our governments for that, what do we need from European governments, what do we need from European business partners, what do we need from local NGOs to do it, making a plan. Then you can be an agenda setter to drive, to design what that means in your context. And last part is preparing for the shared responsibilities. In the CSDDD, there are lots of obligations also for the business partners, the European business partners, things like responsible purchasing, having fair prices, and so on. So you can use these laws also to ask for better business conditions with these arguments. That's what I mean with the shared responsibilities. And then, for African NGOs and rights holders, this opens new pathways to justice. We see that, and this doesn't matter if there's civil liability or not, honestly, because even if they abolish civil liability, there will still be the obligation to remediate, and remediate also means repair. So you can use this obligation if there's human rights violations, go to the complaints mechanisms of the firm, go to the authorities and ask for companies to improve the situation. This is already happening in several German supply chains. Also in the context, as I talked with a friend of mine who's working on this, of African unions, for example, using the new tools to improve their situation. What can African governments do? I would say being active and setting the agenda, preparing businesses and civil society about these standards, spreading general knowledge, insisting on shared responsibilities by European businesses, by European states to drive the development together. There could be potential, if you're smart and design it well, to fill some gaps left now by shrinking development assistance, because essentially these laws oblige the businesses to internalize external costs for sustainability. So it might be that if you really tell a business sector what needs to be done, for example, to improve the situation in cocoa, that these companies, European companies, will help create joint projects that drive a better livelihood for the people locally and invest in that. So, but for that, you have to know the requirements and you have to know what's possible, what the risks are, and what could be done to improve them. And of course, strengthening global and African norms on business human rights would help to be an agenda setter as well. I don't think it's ideal that Europe did the CSDDD. It would have been better to do a joint human rights treaty in the UN, which is currently negotiated. I think it was necessary. Yeah, I don't think it's good that Europe sets effective global norms. I think we should set them together. But I think if we would have waited for the UN treaty, we would have waited forever. So I think it's good that Europe moved, but it's not ideal. Yeah, it should not be Europe making rules that Africa has to comply with. Although, of course, these rules are based on our joint standards, UNGP, human rights, and so on. Yeah. So that's all the thoughts that I wanted to bring. Thanks a lot. And yeah, we'll stop sharing the screen now.
Wow. This kind of feels like a dissertation of some kind. Your session was really it touched on a whole lot of things, and for me personally, looking at everything you've said, Europe has to take care of Europe, and Africa must also be able to do the same. But to do the same, there are certain norms and value systems that are necessarily not homegrown. And in my opinion, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, there are certain things that we can learn. We can learn few things, and we can also apply some of those things to our own peculiar situation on the continent. I will just share a few things from what you've said before we bring Mrs. Ivy Acker to just share some thoughts with us from the National Human Rights Commission. Having listened to you talking about what African governments can do, because Africa is primarily government-driven to a very large extent, and that shows up in the entire compliance, infrastructure within Africa. If the government necessarily doesn't move in a certain direction, businesses cannot dictate the tone without government setting the agenda. So we need government to really be at the forefront of some of these discussions. And that's why we have For Nigeria, for example, we have the National Human Rights Commission. I know that the commission has several, in fact, a lot of massive challenges. And I say that because even on the subject of business and human rights, much of that conversation is driven by donor assistance to a very large extent. And I'm not saying that to undermine, the budgetary allocation or the financial stance of the commission, but I'm talking in practical terms because the commission alone has not risen to the point where it can fully direct. Because when you talked about the German Supply Chain Act, for example, I'm sure that there would be an administrative structure that drives the activities in terms of that act, in terms of the monitoring and the administration of the act. So I do not think that in line with that there's an agency with that much power. Because looking at part of the commission, let me not even dwell on that because we have somebody who is from the Human Rights Commission who can really share on that. But I feel that in essence, there are a lot of things that we can actually learn from what you from commission. Talking about shared responsibility, talking about the impact of human rights, where the buck stops at due diligence on direct suppliers, so it then means that everything that goes on down the value chain may necessarily not be captured at that point in time, because I know that in terms of commodities, for example, a lot of companies that buy into commodities from Africa do at a different level. They don't necessarily have that interaction with the stakeholder farmers on the ground. The stakeholder farmers on the ground might be involved in the land tilling. All the violations take place at that ground level. So when foreign companies approach the African continent to be part of maybe a trade relationship, they are dealing with the middlemen who may not necessarily be reporting on the things that are going on the ground. And that's a lot of NGO activities, really come on board to share those stories and to share those experiences that happen. And of course, social media, for example, in Nigeria, a lot easier to know what goes on in some of these industries, as the case may be. There's so much that you shared, and I took a lot of notes. I can't even exhaust my notes if I were to respond to the things that you talked about. But I believe that we have Mrs. Aka here. So, Mr. Dennis, if you don't mind, you can call Mrs. Aka, Ivy Aka from National Human Rights Commission. You can just share a few thoughts on what Nigeria is doing as a case study in terms of addressing some of these human rights issues for businesses within the down sector of the human rights and business value chain. So she can probably guide us further in this discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. And also thank you, Mr. Daniel, for your wonderful presentation on the subject matter for today. We've covered quite a lot, and I think we have Mrs. Ivy Aka with us. Please, ma, we would like to also just hear from you, receive some of your perspective as to what the Human Rights Commission has done over the years in response to human rights and business. Please, my peer with us, would like to hear from you, Ms. Ivy.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you are hearing me.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join in the conversation. I thank you so much for giving us this floor to make our own contribution. Mr. Daniel, that was a very interesting presentation. And I hope we can partner as a commission, we can partner together to get it right. And Mr. Joseph, you mentioned earlier the need for awareness creation, and that is very key. That is very key because when you're talking about business and human rights in Nigeria, there are some people at the rural areas that don't even know that there is enough, and so it is important for us to start getting to such areas. And so the National Human Rights Commission led the process of developing the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights with other stakeholders, cutting across MDA, civil societies, and the private sector, and of course the UN system. And it went on for a long time until last year. The National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights was approved, and so we now have a NAP. So having a NAP is one thing, and implementation is another thing. And so the National Human Rights Commission is taking the lead with other stakeholders, to ensure that the National Action Plan is implemented. The Federal Ministry of Justice and other development partners, making sure that implementation aligns with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. And so we have had an interagency consultative workshop early this year, of course, with the National Human Rights Commission taking the lead. And the workshop was basically to introduce the NAP to the implementing MDAs. And the MDAs in the NAP have respective roles to play, responsibilities and roles. And so this meeting was to clarify their roles and responsibilities, and then to also build a common rollout plan across government. The Commission also convened a high-level workshop with other stakeholders like the Ministry of Justice and partners from the UNDP, the UN Global Compact, the OHCHR, the Norwegian Embassy, a British Commission, to shift from policy to practice, focusing on awareness, institutional capacity, and targeted engagement of public and private entities. So we had companies, we had CSOs, we had partners, donor agencies in the same room, and the UN system, trying to create awareness on how we shift this policy to practice, how we put the plan into practice, And then the Federal Ministry of Justice, in collaboration with the National Human Rights Commission, set up a laws review and consolidation committee, sometime in October. That step is to support aligning sectorial laws and regulations with responsible business norms referenced in the National Action Plan on human rights, and to ensure that everybody is on the same page, when it comes to business and human rights, And then the issue of creating awareness, keeping stakeholders informed, and then inviting participation in the implementing activities. So the Human Rights Commission used its official bulletins and newsletters and publications and media updates to publish the NAP as a transformative policy document. And this is not enough. There is a gap, like Mr. Joseph stated initially, there is a gap. There are, how many companies know that there is an existing action plan on business and human rights? And then how many host communities, people at the rural areas that are engaged in businesses, small businesses, petty businesses, online businesses, how many are aware that there is a NAP? And so the need for partnership, the need for collaborations and awareness creation is very, very key. And for the Human Rights Commission, we are still doing that, ensuring that people are aware that this NAP exists, and also aware of the access to remedy, whenever a human rights violation takes place in business areas. So the Commission also flagged the need to convene national working groups under the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights umbrella to analyze the gaps and then to coordinate the next step to be taken, and then to use that forum to prepare that coordination space. So the need to have a national working group, as it has been spelled out in the document, to make sure that activities are coordinated, then to also establish the same working groups in states. And so the commission has already done that in Borno State, in Katsina State, and Enugu State, establishing the National Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which is a group that cuts across the MDAs, the ministries, departments, and agencies of government, the civil societies, private sectors, donor agencies, then the UN itself, the UN system, and so this working group is also key in the implementation of the National Action Plan. And then the issue of capacity building across MDAs cannot be overemphasized. The judiciary and even the businesses themselves, they need to know that there is an action plan, a policy plan on business and human rights. And so when issues of litigation comes to their table, to their courts, they know what to do. They are aware that this is a violation of business and human rights. The commission was in receipt of a complaint years back on business and human rights, where some group of persons came from the Niger Delta with a complaint of environmental pollution. And the commission took up the case and set a panel of inquiry. And, the oil company that was the alleged violator now had to take the commission to court, So these are the issues that the judiciary needs to know what is in there, so that they would have they need judicial training, so that they know, and then for the grievance mechanisms, so that they know what to do when such cases come before them, And then, Nigerians' actions are being tied into the regional business and human rights fora and the UN platforms, like the UN Global Compact, the African Business and Human Rights Forum, UNDP, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And so for the commission, that is what we have done so far. We are still looking at more partnership, more collaborations, and with stakeholders, and then the need to create awareness. It's there, especially the host communities, the rural areas, and then the companies, the businesses themselves. They need to create awareness on the corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And then the key thing is the access to remedy when human rights are violated in businesses. So people need to know, and so that the National Action Plan will make meaning to them as well. And so far, that is what we have done, Mr. Joseph, and we are still hoping for more collaborations. We are more open for collaborations and learning more from other clients as well. And so thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
So very much, Ms. Iviaka. Thank you so much. I'm very happy with a lot of things that you mentioned, and yeah. I'm very positive that these things would definitely trickle down and begin to see such more part of the awareness that has already started before now. To the end of ensuring that Nigerian citizens or citizens in Africa can understand how to, especially talking about access to remedy. I just want a situation whereby if Daniel could share, like in practical terms, what access to remedy, feels like. What's that process like in Germany, for example, so that if we can also share our and then if they are adopt with our own system. Is access to remedy usually government driven, or is it company driven? So if you can share briefly with us, Mr. Daniel, that would really help the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of business human rights, but I'm just talking about the German Supply Chain Act now. No? I mean, there are other laws that are relevant in the German context as well. But in terms of the German Supply Chain Act, so you have several pathways to remedy. let's say there's a human rights violation. Maybe let's say, okay, at an African supplier in Nigeria, the minimum wage wasn't paid, and there's a German buyer firm, yeah, and now the Nigerian union or the Human Rights Commission could bring this case to first the complaints mechanism of the company itself. Yeah, and then the company could think about because the company is obliged to have a complaints mechanism. Huh? And then this is happening. I have been involved in such cases, not from Nigeria, but from other countries, where NGOs, unions, or victims also personally bring cases to the complaints mechanisms of the firms internally. And there's a certain openness to also resolving these cases because, of course, the companies, if it's a well-argued case, they know that if they don't respond well, the people will go to the authority after, or they will go to court. And they don't want that. So there's a certain readiness to find a good solution. No, so that's one potential thing. One problem that you will have there, the question is remediation and reparation covered in the German Act or not? There's a legal dispute about this. Some say it's just bringing an adverse impact to an end, and they say this does not cover reparation. I say that is not true because bringing an impact to an end means repairing it. Otherwise, the impact is still there, no? But if you don't get what you want, you could go to the German authority and you could bring the case, but there it's necessary the representation issues. So normally only the victim itself can bring the case. An NGO could also bring the case, but they would not have formal standing in the procedure. But they could bring the case, and the government, the authority, will be obliged to act, but you don't have the formal standing rights. Yeah, so it's better to bring someone that can the victims themselves. Of course, that's always a big hurdle also. No, but these would be kind of in the German Supply Chain Act, the accesses to remedy that you have, and yeah, people are using it, and I think it's also working often. Cases from China, from Latin America, also cases that I heard about from Africa, because yeah, the companies don't want this to escalate, so they act on it.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Mrs. Ivy, I don't know if you can also give us a background of how the Commission deals with issues of remediation and remedies primarily. If you can just share in very few minutes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Like, the Commission has a very robust complaints treatment mechanism. And so when complaints come, it goes through a platform, a mechanism. And Mr. Joseph, you are aware because you were once here, and so when there are issues, for instance, I made mention of the fact that we had a complaint of pollution, and the company had to take us to court, and we are still in court for that, and so directly we have not had a series of complaints on business and human rights issues, so we are looking forward to it. We are now creating more awareness so that people can come and report issues of business and human rights whenever we have such complaint. But however, we have NGOs that we partner with that take on such cases, like SERAP, for instance, partners with the Commission to take such cases. So that is where we are right now, Mr. Joseph.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Daniel. I think I was saying something in the chat box.
Yeah,
so we can just, yes.
If you want to, yeah, I can respond to the first. So the first question was a bit the question about the hypocrisy, giving selective accountability that targets private firms but softened obligations for state-backed enterprises. and consumers. There is certainly some hypocrisy there, but it's first important to get it clear. So, I mean, I work, for example, at a part-time. I work at a state-owned firm. No, and it doesn't make a difference that we are state-owned. We have to comply with the act. No, and we implement the act. So until that point, there is no hypocrisy. The hypocrisy begins when you think about, for example, my city-state, Hamburg, big city, big administration. If they buy stuff, let's say they buy coffee for the offices here in Hamburg, they don't have to meet these standards. The law doesn't apply to them. That is an hypocrisy, definitely. And it's not being resolved by the CSDDD. It's the same logic there. And that's a big problem, because actually, like, the state buying things should have more, not less responsibilities than businesses, because that's what the UNGP says. And I mean, of course, they have an obligation to protect. Hopefully it will be resolved sometime. It doesn't look like it until now, but it should. And the second question was the question about the risk evaluation. So that it should be done in a way that it does not become a tick boxing exercise. How will this be followed up to ensure? Well, I mean, the thing is, the companies will have to report about this. The first thing is they have the requirement, as I explained, to do an effective risk analysis. So a tick boxing risk analysis is not enough. You have to think hard about the risks, and you have to do underground measures as well, and so on, to really identify them. What happens if you don't? There's a big chance, to a certain degree, well, that no one will find out for some time. But sometime the government will come and control you, because they are obliged to check the reports, and then ask the companies about it. So companies have to report. What is, for example, the German authority doing? They are sending letters to many companies, and I've seen many of these letters. They are asking, how do you do the risk analysis? The company answers in a tick boxing way. Then they say, well, that's not good enough. You have to improve it, and so on and so on. So there is certainly control going on, and will be control going on, but some people will do tick boxing anyway and get away with it for some time. Hopefully sometime they will get fined. But yeah, it will be a continuous improvement also in that way.
Thank you very much. The next question I have basically is for Mrs. Aka. If you don't mind, if you can share with us, does Nigeria have a human rights due diligence, human rights and environmental due diligence process? Like, is there a mandatory process where companies have to comply to any due diligence obligations? And does the Commission wait for companies to reach out to the Commission, or does the Commission, is there a means of the Commission reaching out directly to companies in terms of their human rights obligations?
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. And so there are regulatory bodies and agencies that will have to ensure the conduct of human rights diligence and human rights impact assessment for the operation in Nigeria. For instance, the CAC and all these MDAs are under the National Working Group in the Business and Human Rights, the NAP. You understand? And so we have the Corporate Affairs Commission, for instance, which are supposed to make sure that when companies are bringing back their annual returns every year, they should have a due diligence form. You know, they should have a due diligence report where before, you know, and that is to ensure that they comply with the human rights. You understand? And so, the Central Bank of Nigeria, who is also part of this working group, is also to ensure, for instance, that in loan agreements in all banks, you know, that part of the condition, there should be a clause that spells out that the loan receiver for business is under obligation to respect human rights in all their operations. And so the Commission is not working alone. The action plan has goals and that agencies on their roles today take the national action plan. And communication control, NOFRA, and electoral bank itself to identify issues of human rights violations because they are also regulatory bodies, and that is what happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It appeared that there was some level of noise on the background and the audio wasn't too clear. But from what I think I gathered, basically, I think what Mrs. Aka tried to convey primarily was that the Commission, through its own working group and the MDAs, the ministries, government departments that are featuring the National Action Plan, are coming up with a system of compliance through which human rights due diligence can properly be captured. Personally, I would be very excited to see that happen. Once that happens, I would definitely want to talk about it to see how that can really assist to really spread the word, because I feel that with the Corporate Affairs Commission that has a directory of all companies registered in Nigeria, if that kind of a collaboration happens between the National Human Rights Commission and the Corporate Affairs Commission to push and drive the penetration of human rights due diligence, across different business sectors, that definitely would be something exciting to take place in Nigeria. But of course, we must also be very should I say, very appreciative of the fact that if this process is necessarily not managed properly, it could just be like a tick boxing exercise. If maybe companies are given a form, there is no way to verify, the information that they are providing on those forms, and maybe they just pick a form and they are taking, okay, we do this well, we are doing this 70%, this 100%. It's just like trying to solve a problem. We should not also create another problem. So it will really be nice to see how the commission, the National Human Rights Commission in Nigeria, can navigate the entire process so that in the real sense of it, the impact of that particular collaboration with other agencies is primarily delivering, in the real sense of it, human rights best practices across companies. Primarily for me, when I look at tools, and I'm coming back to the tools for reporting tools, I haven't clearly seen any comprehensive reporting tool on business and human rights in most of the companies I interfaced with. I have had cause to even interface with indigenous oil and gas companies and maritime companies in Nigeria are doing very heavy numbers. Their options definitely span through several communities across Nigeria. And when I talk to lawyers that work, and I also consult for a particular, when I talk to the lawyers within their employment, they don't have any, there's no reporting system, there are no tools, there's absolutely nothing to use as a documentation system or a data-driven system that can say, okay, this is what we did in the month of February, this is what we did in the month of March, this is what we are planning to do within the course of the year, especially as it relates to business and human rights. So that is almost largely very absent within the Nigerian system. I wouldn't know of other jurisdictions across Africa, but looking at the Nigerian peculiarity, that's very much almost absent. Also because of the lack of advocacy, the lack of awareness, or the limited awareness. Let me not say the lack. The limited awareness and the limited advocacy. So we need to see much more of that, taking place in Nigeria. But it would be nice to know from a German perspective now. I want us to just do Germany because EU is like another whole massive box. So if we can just stick to a few of the things that go on under the German Supply Act, are there tools, are there practical risk identification tools that companies can adopt within their own system, be able to map human rights risk and all of that. If there are certain experiences you can share with us, Mr. Daniel, that would really help.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to do that. Well, there's a huge market for tools, for IT tools in managing business human rights risks in human rights risk in business in Europe. There are different tool providers. I have mixed feelings about this because, of course, it's good to measure things and to automate things if it makes sense, if the unit that you are thinking about makes sense to automate, but and measure, because if you measure bullshit things, you will have bullshit incentives, no? And if you automate things that are not useful, then you create a lot of bureaucracy. Unfortunately, to a certain degree, that is what I'm seeing on the IT tool market in Germany. Why? Because they trade t-shirts. They treat t-shirts like bananas. Yeah, they say you have tens of thousands of suppliers, so it's cool if you can all put them into a tool and then it tells you which are the risky ones, and then you say, with the risky ones, I will take standard action A. Makes sense from a management perspective, no? Feels easy. The problem is often this approach results in that these high risk, they will do the same thing with them. If it's your high risk t-shirt supplier or high risk banana supplier, they will normally, in the basic approach, all get the same standard questionnaire, and it has very superficial questions and questions that you would think are a bit crazy, honestly. Things like, do you respect the prohibition of child labor? Yeah, it's like when you go to the US and you tick, are you a terrorist or no? I mean, who would say no? So this is also a bit what created the backlash in Germany against the law, because everyone is sending me questionnaires all the time, and I have to say that I'm no terrorist all the time, and I now hire a person that just fills out questionnaires that says I'm a terrorist. So that's one part of the truth, but the other part of the truth is, or my experience is, yeah, my experience, not the truth, is that they are improving. Some IT tools, for example, say, okay, I heard about an IT tool where tourism companies said, hey, I want you to develop a standard questionnaire focused on the typical risks and risk scenarios in tourism, so that we can always use, and it's a standard tourism. It doesn't ask you like, do you respect child labor, yes or no? But it asks you about, for example, what measures do you have to ensure that there's no child prostitution taking place in the hotels? It's more concrete, but you have to think more. And it's harder to design. So you have to really get these units that you want to scale right, and then you can build good tools. And I'm seeing that the tool providers are moving in that direction slowly. So I'm optimistic that soon we will have better tools.
It's really nice that you've been quite open and sincere about the challenges with having to engage with tools. The other thing I wanted to touch briefly on, which we're almost out of time. I just noticed that we've almost been on for about an hour, 30 minutes. We're supposed to wrap this up by 4:30 West African time, which is in about 3 minutes from now. But I might just take one more question. If we have another question from the audience, we can share that as well. Then we can do a vote of thanks, and we can have today as a wrap already. So I'm looking at stakeholder management, for example. If you can give us an idea with how that process is managed under the German Supply Chain Act, or in terms of the practical work that you do.
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, I will have to hop off very close to the hour, but yeah, for the stakeholder management. So I mean, there's two dimensions to this. No, one thing is the rights holders, and one thing is the stakeholders. I would say both are stakeholders, of course, but and both are important in terms of human rights due diligence. Rights holders are important because you have to involve them in the risk analysis, in the setting of measures, in the evaluation of measures. Because otherwise you're not doing what helps the rights holders, and the whole process is about them. So there is a problem in Germany with this, that we don't have We have unclear rules on this point. Companies could say, oh, it's enough to take their interests into account. We don't have to talk to them. Many companies take this approach of interpreting this, and they say, well, I'm doing a risk analysis. I'm taking their interests into account. I don't have to talk to them. Others take it more serious and say, of course, if they want to say take interest into account, they mean talking to them. The other stakeholders, companies that take this law serious and want to make meaningful measures, will also engage with other stakeholders, with their business peers, with their suppliers, with governments, with sector initiatives to really drive change. And this can be derived also from the effectiveness criterion, because if you don't take into account the other stakeholders, then you cannot have effective measures. But there's room to grow.
Thank you so very much. I wouldn't know if we have any. We can take one more question, the last one, so that we can have this I don't know, Mr. Dennis, is there any other question before we take final words?
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Okay, so far we don't have any questions in the chat box, any more questions within the chat box. But before we go to the last segment of the discussion, the vote of thanks and the rest, please, I would like for us to quickly turn on our videos for a quick picture. We normally usually take a quick screenshot of the sessions that we have, just to capture the moments and what we've been doing so far. So please, I would like to encourage for those of us this particular call, if you can, please turn on your videos for a quick picture time. We'll do that quickly, and then we'll get back to the question if there's any more. And then if there's no more, then we just quickly take the vote of thanks. So please, I would like to kindly encourage for those of us on the call, please kindly turn on your videos so that we can take a quick screenshot. Thank you, Greta. I can see your video.
Don't mind.
Yeah, please, can we have more people turn on their videos? We really, really appreciate that. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Uche. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Ms. Anais. Nice to see you again on the call.
Mr. Dennis, are you done?
Just a moment, please. All right. So I'm done from my end. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. Thank you, everyone. This is not the vote of thanks. I don't know if we have any final words from either Mr. Daniel or Mrs. Aka. If you have any final words, just in a few seconds or within a minute.
Yeah, I would say it's a great time to discuss it public, because all the regulatory requirements give us really the chance to make business a better part of the society. Business is already an important part of the society, but this is really about maximizing the social and environmental potential that business can have for our society. And yeah, it's a great time to work on this and try to make it a success together.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Aka, are you there? Mrs. Aka, are you there? Can you give us just your final statement in a few seconds?
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Network has really been bad, but just to say it's a pleasure being here, and I hope more of such conversations will come up, where we can also go and share our experience. Thank you very much for the good work. Thank you.
This is just to say a very big thank you to everyone who has been part of today's session. I want to say a very big thank you to Mr. Daniel. I am extremely grateful for your participation in today's session. I also want to thank the Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission, Professor Ernest Ojukwu, SAN, CFR. Thank you extremely for making sure that the National Human Rights Commission was part of today's engagement and dialogue. To all the participants who joined in early and who have stayed the course till the end of today's session, thank you as well. Let's keep doing the best that we can to keep pushing for responsible business practices and ensuring that in any opportunity that we have, we're able to make sure that companies are aware of the obligations they have within the value systems and the thought processes around business and human rights. Thank you, Anais, for joining us again today. I'm extremely happy that we've started this conversation series, and we hope to be back again next month. It's a monthly series. Hopefully, we'll have other persons join us next to really discuss around other issues within business and human rights. Thank you once again. God bless us all, and do have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.